Hi folks, my name is Mike Rich and I'm here today to talk to you about painting on metal, specifically aluminum panel like I have here. You may wonder why paint on metal. Well, metal has a lot of very unique properties that other surfaces don't have that I think can really enhance your paintings. One of the things that sets it apart from other surfaces is that it's very smooth, it's a hard surface, it's archival, and most importantly, it's iridescent and or reflective, meaning if you use a material in any sort of thin way, that light passes through your color and sort of bounces back, which creates a very unique effect. You can work on aluminum in many different mediums, but my personal favorite is oil paint. Other things, let's say watercolor, for example, it's a relatively fragile medium. If you were to paint with watercolor on a metal surface, the paint might go on okay and dry, but if you try to come back and put another layer, you'll find that you end up just removing the paint or moving it around after you've put it on there. Same goes for markers like Copic markers. Acrylic is actually a pretty good alternative and works reasonably well on aluminum panel, but what you'll find is that it does not blend nearly as well as oils, so you do have to keep that in mind. It's a little bit more streaky as it goes on. Also, you'll want to wait between layers with acrylic so that you don't inadvertently remove paint before it's fully dry. So it's sort of like a paint a little bit, wait for it to fully dry, paint another layer, and then you'll find that it works out much better. But today I'm going to be talking mostly about working in oil paint on aluminum panel. So some of the properties that you can see here in this 16 by 20 sheet of aluminum is that it's extremely smooth and shiny. This is actually the smooth side. Many of these panels are two-sided. The back side shows you what it looked like before I removed the protective covering. On the back, it's actually brushed metal, which means there's a little more texture to it. You might want to use that in a scenario where you were mounting artwork to a hard archival surface. But most of the time, folks pick the smooth side to work on. So I've already removed the plastic covering, and I generally recommend that folks keep the covering on the back side unless you plan on making a two-sided painting. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the materials that one would use with painting in oils on aluminum panel. You can use pretty much all your usual materials that you would, the brushes, the paints, linseed oil, paint thinner, that type of thing. The only thing that I would steer you away from in this particular case would be metal palette knives. One of the things about aluminum panel is that despite the fact that it's very strong and hard, it scratches very easily. And so you may want to avoid using metal instruments with your painting. Some people also prefer to use soft brushes. So in oils, probably the main ones that one might be drawn to for this type of painting would be nylon or synthetic brushes like this soft white brush here, or sable brushes, which are natural bristled brushes, but they are very soft as well. Either of those would work particularly well on aluminum surfaces. One of the things that sometimes throws people is sort of knowing what to draw your image out with. I've seen people recommend things like compressed charcoal. I haven't had a whole lot of luck with that myself. Graphite, in particular, what I have here, which is woodless graphite. works particularly well, I find, because it makes a really fine line that is unobtrusive and easy to remove if you need to. Um, Another slightly less traditional option that I've had luck with in the past is actually a dry erase marker. Believe it or not, this is an Expo wet erase marker. And I've had success with this allowing me to draw out my image before I start painting. Word of caution, if you aren't sure what to use to draw on your metal surface, you probably want to test it first on something else. When in doubt, test it out. So I found that other brands of wet erase markers don't come off. So just be careful about that. And of course, there's always the option of using a small brush with some thinner and actually sort of drawing with the paint on the surface, because if you make a mistake and you're working in oils, then of course it's very easy to just wipe off with a rag. So as far as removing the paint, essentially removing the paint from metal and exposing metal underneath is sort of an example of the sgraffitto technique. Sgraffitto is actually from the Italian to scratch, and that's a technique where essentially you wipe or scratch away areas of a picture to reveal what's underneath. In this case, it would be, of course, the shiny aluminum. So in order to do that, my personal favorites are color shapers, which some of you may have used before on wood panels or possibly even on canvas. But these are great because they're bendy and essentially allow you to sort of cut into wet areas of paint to refine detail, to reveal what's underneath. And it does that essentially similar to palette knives, but without scratching the surface, because these are very, very rubbery in nature. Another one that you're probably also familiar with from just regular old oil painting would be Q-tips. So Q-tip goes a long way for precision detail if you need to make an adjustment or something like that. So it's a good idea to have Q-tips and paint thinner on hand. Other than that, there aren't really any other unique materials that I'd be too concerned about, but do give some thought to the brushes you choose. Of course, bristle brushes would be totally fine if that's all you have. Just keep in mind that bristle brushes may leave sort of streaks on the surface. So I'd experiment with a few different types of brushes and see what works best for you. In a moment, I'm going to be demonstrating on a painting. I'm actually going to be painting this alligator right here on the aluminum panel. And so I'll do a time lapse of that. And while I'm working, you'll notice that I'll draw it out in graphite. And as I work, I'm likely going to be using the Q-tips and the color shapers to adjust or correct things along the way. All right, folks, so this is the mostly finished painting on an aluminum panel. Hopefully you got a little bit of a sense of how the surface takes paint. I was intentionally leaving my palette in view of the camera so that people could follow along and kind of see how I mix colors. I thought that might be useful. And perhaps you noticed in the time lapse that I did use a lot of Q-tips to correct, bring the metal back in, even sort of do a little bit of linear painting with the Q-tips, and I used the color shaper a little bit as well. The light areas of metal are getting direct light at this moment, and I don't really dare stand it up so that the paint runs. So I'm going to leave it where it is, but it's quite gray in person in most lighting situations. But I was hoping for sort of a bit of a camouflage feel for the alligator, because one of the things that really drew me to this subject was the fact that alligators seem to have the ability to disappear in plain sight. If you see them out in nature, they could be right next to you sometimes before you really notice that they're there, and I hoped to capture some of that in the painting. So, you know, if you find painting on metal interesting, get yourself a piece and give it a try. Let me know how it works out. Pitfalls for painting on aluminum, things just to keep in mind. You know, obviously try not to scratch it either before or after making the painting. If you drop aluminum, it will dent. So be very careful handling it. And some artists, once the paint is 100% dry, they swear by varnishing it so that it keeps it safe. Anywhere where paint is a little bit thinned out with paint thinner, those areas, if they were to be rubbed or scraped against something, the paint would likely come off. So that is an option to do, like a Damar varnish. Probably a gloss would work the best in regards to the metal. But personally, I don't tend to varnish mine because I like the sort of raw metal look, especially where it shows through. So up to you. But other than that, it's a lot like painting on a regular surface. So I would encourage everybody to give it a go.